The woman threw her wine in my face. Just like that. No warning. No build-up that I could have braced against. 1 second I was standing beside her table holding a menu and asking if she was ready to order, and the next second red wine was running down my forehead, dripping off my chin, pooling in the collar of my uniform like blood settling into a wound. The restaurant went silent. 23 people stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped breathing. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward me, waiting to see what I would do. I did nothing. I stood there. I let the wine drip. I let the laughter from her table reach my ears and pass through me the way wind passes through an open window. I picked up the napkin from the edge of her table. I wiped my face. I said, "I apologize for the inconvenience, ma'am. Can I bring you another glass?" And the woman looked at me with the smile of someone who has never once in her life been told no, and she said, "Yes. And this time, do not stand so close. You smell like poverty." I went to the kitchen. I put both hands on the stainless steel counter. I closed my eyes, and I did the thing I have been doing every single day for 3 years. I pushed it down. The heat that starts in my chest. The electricity that runs along my arms and settles in my fists like a current looking for a ground wire. The thing that lives inside me that is not anger, not exactly, but something more precise. Something trained. Something that knows exactly how to turn a human body into a problem and a problem into a solution in under 4 seconds. I pushed it all the way down to the floor of myself, and I locked it there, and I whispered the same words I whisper every time. "I promised you, Mama. I promised. My name is Ebony. I am 26 years old. I work as a waitress at a restaurant called La Sera in a small city on the southern coast of Italy that I will not name because naming it would make it easier for certain people to find me. And certain people finding me is the reason I am here in the first place, 3,000 miles from home, using a name that is mine but a life that belongs to someone I invented. I need to tell you who I was before I became this. Before the apron and the yes ma'am and the wine dripping down my face. Before I learned to make my hands carry plates instead of what they were built to carry. I need to tell you because if I do not, you will not understand what happened in that restaurant. You will not understand why a woman threw wine in my face, and I did nothing. And you will not understand why, when she came back, when she put her hands on me, when she crossed the one line I had drawn in the dirt of my new life, everything changed. Subscribe right now. I am asking you to subscribe because this story is the only time I have ever told the truth about who I am, and I need you here for every word of it. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. Not the Lagos you see in the music videos. The Lagos of rooftop parties and designer clothes and beautiful people dancing in slow motion. The other Lagos. The one underneath. The one made of corrugated metal and open gutters and the particular smell of too many people living in too little space with too little of everything. My father was a mechanic. He fixed cars that should not have been running, cars held together by wire and prayer, and he charged so little that the prayer was usually more valuable than the payment. My mother sold peppers and tomatoes at the market. She woke up at 4 every morning and walked 40 minutes to her stall and stood in the sun for 12 hours and came home with money that disappeared into rent and food and school fees before it had time to cool in her hand. We were poor. Not the kind of poor that is temporary, the kind that sits on you like a weight and reshapes your skeleton over time until standing up straight becomes an act of defiance. I found boxing when I was 13, not in a gym. There were no gyms where I lived. I found it in a yard behind a church where a man named Coach Ade had hung a bag from a tree and was teaching boys to hit it. I stood at the fence and watched for 3 days. On the 4th day, Coach Ade looked at me and said, "Are you going to stand there forever, or are you going to come learn something?" I learned something. I learned that my body, which had always felt like a burden, like a thing I had to feed and clothe and drag through each day, was actually a weapon. A precise, fast, devastating weapon that could be trained and refined and sharpened until it did exactly what I told it to do. By 16, I was fighting in local matches. By 18, I was winning. By 20, I had a record that people talked about in circles I did not even know existed. I was fast. Not quick. Fast. There is a difference. Quick is reactive. Fast is intentional. I could see a punch coming the way a hawk sees a mouse from 100 feet. Early, clearly, with enough time to decide whether to dodge it or let it land, because letting it land would open a counter that would end the fight. And I hit hard. Harder than my size suggested. Harder than the men who trained me expected. Coach Ade used to say that my power came from the ground, that it traveled up through my feet and my legs and my hips and my shoulders and arrived at my fist with the accumulated force of every single thing I had survived. He said I did not punch with my arm. I punched with my history. Subscribe right now, because the fight I am about to tell you about, the one that destroyed my family, is the reason I am hiding in a restaurant in Italy letting a woman throw wine in my face. And the woman who threw that wine has no idea what she's playing with. When I was 22, I was invited to fight in an underground match in a city I will not name. The money was significant, more money than my father made in 2 years. The kind of money that could move my family out of the corrugated metal and into a real house with real walls and a real door that locked from the inside. I said yes. Of course I said yes. You say yes when you are 22 and your mother's back is bent from standing in the sun for 12 hours a day and your father's hands are cracked and bleeding from fixing engines for pennies. You say yes because the only currency your body has ever earned you is pain, and someone is finally offering to convert that pain into something your family can use. The fight was in a warehouse. Concrete floor. No ring. No ropes. A circle painted on the ground, and 200 men standing around it holding drinks and money and the particular energy of people who have come to watch something that they would deny watching if asked about it in daylight. My opponent was a woman named Kira. Tall, Russian, blonde hair cut short, arms that were corded with the kind of muscle that comes from systematic, professional, well-funded training. She was connected, I learned later, to a man named Viktor Volkov, who ran an organization that operated across Eastern Europe and parts of West Africa. An organization that used underground fighting the way a legitimate business uses trade shows, as a venue for networking, for establishing dominance, for demonstrating that the people aligned with them were superior. Kira was supposed to win. That was the arrangement. Not explicitly. Nobody told me to lose. But the room understood. The money understood. The 200 men holding drinks understood. Kira would win because Kira belonged to Volkov, and Volkov's people did not lose, and the natural order of the evening would be maintained, and everyone would go home satisfied. I did not know any of this. I knew a woman was standing across from me. I knew the fight would last as long as it lasted, and I knew that the money waiting for me on the other side of that fight was going to change my mother's life. The fight lasted 90 seconds. I will not describe it in detail because the details belong to a version of me that I have put away. What I will tell you is that Kira was good, trained, disciplined, but she had been trained in systems, in patterns, in the choreography of organized combat. And I had been trained in a yard behind a church by a man who understood that the most dangerous fighter is not the one with the best technique, but the one with the most at stake. I had everything at stake. Kira went down in 90 seconds. And the room went silent in a way that I recognized instantly as dangerous. The wrong kind of silent. The kind of silent that a forest goes when a predator enters. I took the money. I went home. I gave it to my mother. I watched her count it with hands that were shaking, and I watched her face do something I had never seen it do before. It relaxed. The tension that had lived in her jaw and her shoulders and the lines around her eyes for as long as I could remember simply released, like a fist opening after decades of clenching. That was Tuesday. On Thursday, they came. Subscribe now, please, because what I am about to tell you is the hardest thing I have ever said, and I need you here. I need to know someone is listening. Subscribe and stay. I was not home when they came. I was at Coach Ade's yard, training, hitting the bag, preparing for the next fight, because there was always a next fight and the money from the last one was already spent on things we needed. The deposit on a better apartment, my brother's school fees, medicine for my father's hands. My phone rang. A neighbor. She was screaming so loud that the words were not words anymore. They were just sound, just frequency, just the vibration of a woman trying to communicate something that language was not designed to hold. I ran. I ran 2 miles. I ran through streets I had walked 1,000 times. I ran past the market where my mother sold tomatoes. I ran past the church where Coach Ade's bag hung from the tree. I ran until I turned the corner onto our street and saw the smoke. Not a lot of smoke. They had not burned the house. They had done something more precise, more deliberate, more instructional. They had come inside. They had done what they came to do. And they had left the door open so that the neighbors would see. I found my father on the kitchen floor. He was already gone. His hands, those cracked, bleeding, Beautiful hands that had fixed 1,000 engines and held my face when I was small and clapped when I won my first fight were still. I found my mother in the hallway. She was not gone. Not yet. She was holding on with a stubbornness that I recognized because it was the same stubbornness she had given me. The refusal to let go until she had said what she needed to say. I held her. I put her head in my lap and I held her and I said, "Mama, Mama, Mama," as if saying the word enough times could reverse what had happened, could rewind the day, could put the blood back inside her body and the life back inside my father and the smoke back inside whatever hell it had come from. She looked at me. Her eyes were clear. That is the thing I cannot get past. Even now, even 3 years later, her eyes were perfectly clear, not clouded by pain or fear or the fog of dying. Clear, like she had been waiting for this moment, like she had known it was coming and had prepared what she was going to say and was not going to waste a single second of clarity. "Promise me," she said. "Anything, Mama. No more fighting. No more fists. No more blood. Leave this place. Go far away. Disappear. Become someone else. Someone who does not hurt people. Someone whose hands carry food and flowers and the faces of her children. Promise me, Abony. Promise me on my body. Mama, I need to get you to a hospital. I need to. Promise me." I promised. She died in my lap on the floor of our hallway while the neighbors stood in the open doorway and watched, and the sound of Legos continued outside, indifferent to the fact that my world had just ended. Subscribe right now. I need you to subscribe because every word I have told you so far is the foundation for what happens next, and what happens next is the reason this story exists. Stay with me. I disappeared. That is the short version. The long version involves 6 months of hiding, of moving through countries on buses and boats and the back seats of strangers' cars, of changing my hair and my name and my body language and every external signal that might connect the woman I was becoming to the fighter I had been. I ended up in Italy, in a small coastal city where no one knew my face or my name or my hands. I got a job at La Sera, a quiet restaurant with white tablecloths and candles on the tables and a kitchen that smelled like olive oil and garlic and the particular warmth of a place where food is made with care. I was a waitress. I carried plates. I said yes, ma'am, and no, sir, and right away. I was invisible. I was nothing. I was keeping my promise. For 3 years, I kept it. 3 years of pushing the current down. 3 years of feeling my fists tighten when a man at a table spoke to me like I was subhuman and then unclenching them, finger by finger, because I had promised. 3 years of lying in bed at night with my hands open, palms up, staring at them, willing them to forget what they knew. They did not forget. Muscle memory does not work that way. The body remembers even when the mind begs it not to. Every morning, I woke up and my hands remembered. And every morning, I told them no. Not today. Not ever again. And then the woman threw wine in my face. Her name, I learned that day from the other waitresses who pulled me into the kitchen and wiped my face and looked at me with the wide eyes of people who wanted to warn me but were too afraid to speak loudly, was Camilla De Luca. And Camilla De Luca was the wife of a man named Enzo De Luca. And Enzo De Luca was the reason the other waitresses were afraid to speak loudly. Enzo De Luca ran this city. Not officially. Not with a title or an office. He ran it the way men like him always run things, from underneath, from behind, from the shadow that falls across every transaction and every business and every decision made within the borders of his influence. He was feared. His wife was feared by extension. Camilla walked through this city the way a queen walks through a kingdom built on the backs of people who cannot afford to stand up. And she had chosen me. Not randomly. Specifically. She came back to La Sera 3 days after the wine. And this time, she did not come alone. She brought 2 women. Friends. Companions. The kind of women who surround powerful women not out of affection but out of strategy, because proximity to power is its own currency. Camilla sat at the same table. She requested me specifically. The manager looked at me with an apology in his eyes, but compliance in his body because the manager also lived in Enzo De Luca's city and the manager had a family. I went to the table. I took the order. I brought the food. I moved with the careful precision of a woman walking through a minefield, each step measured, each word selected, each breath controlled. It was not enough. Camilla wanted a reaction. She needed it. Women like Camilla feed on submission the way fire feeds on oxygen, and my silence was not submission. It was something else. Something she could feel, but not name. Something that made her uncomfortable because it suggested that the woman in the apron was not performing obedience, but choosing restraint. And choice implies power. And Camilla DeLuca did not tolerate power in people she had designated as powerless. "You walk like you think you are someone," Camilla said, loud enough for the room to hear. "But you are nothing. You are a nobody from nowhere, serving food to people who matter. Remember that. Remember your place." I said nothing. I turned to go, and Camilla grabbed my arm. She grabbed it hard. Hard enough to leave a mark. Hard enough to stop me in place. And then she stood up and she put her face close to mine and she said, "When I speak to you, you look at me. You do not walk away. You do not turn your back. You stand here and you take what I give you because that is what people like you are for." I looked at her hand on my arm. I looked at her face. And I heard my mother's voice. I heard it as clearly as if she was standing beside me. "Promise me, Ebony, no more fighting." I was going to walk away. I swear to you. I was going to absorb this the way I had absorbed everything else for 3 years. I was going to push the current down and lock it and go home and lie in bed with my hands open and tell them no, not today, not ever. But Camilla did not let me walk away. She swung at me. Open hand. A slap aimed at my face. The kind of slap that women like Camilla give to women like me in cities like this. The slap that says I can do this because no one will stop me and no one will care and you will stand here and accept it because the alternative is worse. I did not accept it. Subscribe. Subscribe right now. Because what happened in the next 3 seconds in that restaurant is the moment my promise broke and my past came back and the woman who had been sleeping inside me for 3 years opened her eyes. Subscribe and do not leave. My body moved before my mind gave permission. That is how training works. That is what Coach Ade built into me in that yard behind the church. You do not think. You respond. The body reads the trajectory, calculates the timing, selects the counter, and executes, all before the conscious mind has finished forming the word no. I caught her wrist. I redirected the slap. I did not hit her. Let me be clear about that. I did not strike Camilla DeLuca. I controlled her. I caught her wrist midair with a grip that communicated, in the language that bodies speak when words are insufficient, that the hand she had just swung at me was now operating under different management. Her 2 friends stood up. One of them grabbed a glass from the table. The other came around the side. They moved the way untrained people move when they are accustomed to winning through intimidation rather than skill, loudly, obviously, telegraphing every intention. I released Camilla. I stepped to the left. The woman with the glass swung past me. I caught her elbow, turned her, and guided her into the table so gently that the only thing damaged was her pride. The second woman grabbed my hair. I reached back, found the pressure point on the inside of her wrist that Coach Ade had shown me when I was 15, and applied enough force to open her fingers without breaking anything. The entire sequence took less than 5 seconds. I stepped back. All 3 women were standing. No one was hurt. Nothing was broken. But the room had changed. The air had changed. Every person in that restaurant was staring at me with the expression of people who have just watched a magic trick and are trying to figure out where the rabbit came from. I straightened my apron. I looked at Camilla. She was holding her wrist. Her face was pale. Her mouth was open, but nothing was coming out because her vocabulary did not contain a word for what had just happened. She had swung at a waitress, and the waitress had caught her hand like it was a fly. I turned. I walked to the kitchen. I untied my apron. I set it on the counter. I walked out the back door. And I kept walking. Behind me, I could hear the restaurant erupting. Voices. Phones being pulled from pockets. The sound of a story being born in real time. A story that would reach Enzo DeLuca before I reached my apartment. I had broken my promise. And now the past was awake. Drop a comment right now. Tell me what you think happens when Enzo DeLuca hears about this. Tell me what you think he does. And subscribe, because part 3 is where the truth comes out, and I promise you, you are not ready for it. I sat in my apartment that night with the lights off and my hands on the table, and I talked to my mother. I do this sometimes. I sit in the dark and I speak to her as if she is in the room, as if the chair across from me is occupied, as if the 3 years and 3,000 miles between her hallway floor and my kitchen table are a distance that love can cover if you are willing to pretend. I am sorry, Mama, I said. She put her hands on me. I could not let her. I know what I promised. I know what you asked me. But she put her hands on me, and my body remembered. before my heart could stop it. Silence. The kind of silence that comes from talking to someone who cannot answer. The loudest silence there is. They're going to come for me now. The way they came before. The way they always come when someone like me stands up in a room full of people who are supposed to stay down. I knew what was going to happen. I had lived this before. The underground fight. The victory that was supposed to be a defeat. The retaliation that followed. The pattern was identical. A powerful person is embarrassed. The embarrassment becomes a wound. The wound becomes an order. The order becomes men at your door. I should have run. That is what the smart version of me, the version my mother tried to create with her last breath, would have done. Pack a bag. Walk to the bus station. Become invisible again in some other small city in some other country where Enzo De Luca's name meant nothing. But I was tired of running. Do you understand what that feels like? To be so tired of running that the fear of what happens when you stop is smaller than the exhaustion of taking one more step? I had been running for 3 years. Before that, I had been fighting. Before that, I had been surviving. My entire life was a series of motions designed to keep me alive, and I was tired. Not physically, spiritually. Tired in the part of me where decisions are made. The part that chooses between one more day of hiding and the moment you plant your feet and say no, whatever comes, I am standing here. I went to work the next morning. Not to La Sera. I had no job at La Sera anymore. I went to the restaurant because my last paycheck was there and I needed it because the money I had saved was not enough to live on for more than 2 weeks. The manager was standing outside. He saw me coming. His face did something complicated, a mixture of sympathy and fear that collapsed into a kind of helpless shrug. Ebony, I cannot give you the check. Why? They said not to. They said you are not to be paid. They said you are not to come back here. Who said? He did not answer. He did not need to. His eyes said the name his mouth could not. I stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant where I had worked for 3 years, where I had carried plates and smiled, and said yes ma'am, and pushed the fighter down into the basement of myself every single day, and I understood that the machine was already in motion. The retaliation, the erasure, the slow, methodical process by which people like Enzo De Luca remove people like me from the equation. Subscribe right now. Subscribe because what happened next, what happened when Enzo De Luca's men came to my apartment that night, is the moment I found out something that changed everything. Something that connected the wine-throwing wife and the underground fight and my parents' murder into a single, devastating line. Subscribe. They came at 11 o'clock. 3 men. They did not knock. They opened the door with a key that should not have existed, but did because Enzo De Luca owned the building I lived in, the way he owned most buildings in this city, the way he owned the restaurant and the manager and the fear that kept everyone compliant. I was sitting at my kitchen table. Lights on this time. Hands flat on the surface. Palms down. Not clenched. Open. The way my mother asked me to keep them. The 3 men entered. 2 were large, the kind of large that is hired for visual intimidation rather than actual skill. The 3rd was different. Smaller. Sharper. He moved with the economy of someone who had been trained, and I recognized the movement the way a musician recognizes a chord, instantly, completely, without needing to analyze it. You are Ebony, the sharp one said. Yes. You put your hands on Mrs. De Luca. Mrs. De Luca put her hands on me first. I defended myself. Mrs. De Luca does not need a reason, and you do not get to defend yourself. Not in this city. Not against her. He stepped closer. Mr. De Luca wants to see you. You can come with us voluntarily, or you can come with us involuntarily. The result is the same. The experience is different. I looked at him. I looked at his hands. I looked at the way his weight was distributed, left foot forward, right foot back, the stance of a man who has been in fights and expects to be in more. And something in me shifted. Not the current. Not the electricity. Something deeper. Something that was not about fighting at all. Recognition. Who trained you? I asked. He blinked. The question was not in his script. What? Your stance. Your weight distribution. The way you entered the room. Right side leading, left hand free. That is not military. That is not police. That is fight training. Specifically underground fight training. The kind they teach in the circuit. Who trained you? He stared at me, and I saw something move behind his eyes. The same kind of recognition I was feeling, reflected back. How do you know about the circuit? He asked. Because I was in it. 3 years ago. Lagos. I fought a woman named Kira. Russian. Blonde. Connected to a man named Volkov. The room changed. I could feel it change the way you feel the pressure drop before a storm. The two large men looked at the sharp one. The sharp one looked at me with an intensity that had shifted from professional to personal. "You are the one who beat Kira," he said. It was not a question. "Yes. Volkov put a bounty on you. After the fight, he said you humiliated his organization. He sent people to send a message. I know what message he sent. He sent it to my parents." Silence. My father was killed on the kitchen floor. My mother died in the hallway. The message was received. The sharp man was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that made the floor drop out from under my life for the second time. Volkov did not send that order alone. He did not operate in Lagos without local authorization. The West African side of the network, the people who actually carried out the hit, they were coordinated through a European partner. Someone who had financial interests in the circuit. Someone who used the fights to launder money and establish territorial dominance. He paused. That partner was Enzo De Luca. Subscribe. Right now. Subscribe because I am standing in my kitchen and the man in front of me just told me that the person who owns this building, owns this city, the person whose wife threw wine in my face and grabbed my arm, is the same person who authorized the murder of my parents. Subscribe. I did not speak. I could not. The information was too large for my mouth. It filled the room. It pressed against the walls. It rearranged every single thing I thought I knew about the last 3 years, every coincidence, every accident, every random turn that had led me to this city, to that restaurant, to the table where Camilla De Luca sat and looked at me and called me nothing. I had not come here by accident. The universe, or God, or whatever force moves beneath the surface of our lives and arranges the pieces we cannot see, had put me here, in his city, in his restaurant, in front of his wife, 3,000 miles from home, and I had landed in the one place on earth where the man who destroyed my family ate dinner and drank wine and lived as if the lives he had taken were entries in a ledger that had long since been balanced. He does not know, the sharp man said quietly. De Luca does not know who you are. He does not know about the connection. To him, you are just a waitress who embarrassed his wife. He sent us to bring you in so he could make an example. He does not know that you are the fighter from Lagos. He does not know about your parents. But you know, I said. I know because I was part of the circuit. I know because I saw what happened to fighters who won when they were supposed to lose. I know because I left that world for the same reason you left it. Because it takes everything and gives nothing back. He looked at his two companions. Then he looked at me. I am not going to bring you to him, he said. The two large men shifted. Marco, De Luca said. I know what De Luca said. I also know what I am saying. We are not bringing her. He will. I know what he will do. And I am telling you, what he will do to us for disobeying is nothing compared to what she will do to whoever he sends next. I have seen the footage from Lagos. I know what she is. And if De Luca puts her in a room with the intention of making an example, the only example that will be made is not the one he expects. He turned back to me. You have two choices. You leave tonight. Right now, I will give you a head start. De Luca will send someone else tomorrow, and by then you can be gone. Or you stay. And whatever happens after that is between you and him and the ghost of every person his money has killed. Subscribe right now. I am telling you for the last time. Subscribe because the choice I made in that kitchen, the choice between running one more time and staying one last time, is the reason this story ends the way it ends. Subscribe and hear it. I stayed. Not because I wanted violence. Not because the current was pulling me. Not because the fighter in me was hungry. I stayed because my mother died on a hallway floor and the man who authorized it was living 4 miles away in a mansion on a hill, drinking wine from glasses like the one his wife threw in my face, and the injustice of that distance, the distance between my mother's hallway and his dining room, was a distance I could no longer tolerate. I stayed because running is a form of dying. Slow dying. The kind that lets you keep breathing while it takes everything else. I had been dying slowly for 3 years. Dying in my apron. Dying in my yes ma'am. Dying in the open hands I held up every night, begging them to forget. I did not want to die anymore. And I did not want to kill. I wanted something more precise than either. I wanted Enzo De Luca to know who I was, to know what his money had purchased on a Thursday afternoon in Lagos, to know the face of the daughter whose parents he had erased as a business expense. Marco left with his men. He gave me a phone number. He said use it if you need to disappear quickly. I never used it. The next morning, I walked to Enzo DeLuca's mansion. On foot, through the city he owned, past the shops he controlled, past the people who lived under the weight of his name. I walked up the hill. I walked to the gate. And I stood there until the security cameras found me, and a voice came through the intercom asking who I was. "Tell Mr. DeLuca that the waitress from La Serra is here," I said. "Tell him I am not leaving." 40 minutes later, I was standing in his living room. He was sitting in a leather chair. Camilla was beside him on a sofa, her wrist still bearing the faint mark of where I had gripped it. 4 men stood along the walls, armed, positioned, ready. Enzo DeLuca was 53. Silver hair, expensive clothes. The face of a man who had long ago stopped distinguishing between what he wanted and what he was entitled to, because the distinction had never cost him anything. "You are either very brave or very stupid," he said. "I am the daughter of David and Funk Adeyemi," I said. 3 years ago, you authorized a retaliation against a fighter who won a match in the Lagos Underground Circuit. A match connected to a man named Victor Volkov. The retaliation was carried out against the fighter's family. 2 people were killed, a mechanic and a woman who sold tomatoes. They were my parents. The room went still. Enzo's face did not change dramatically, but I was trained to read bodies the way most people read words, and I saw the shift. The micro-expression, the fractional tightening around his eyes that told me the information had landed and was being processed. "You walked into my house," he said slowly, "to tell me this. I walked into your house because your wife threw wine in my face and grabbed my arm, and I cannot let the coincidence of that pass without you knowing who I am. I am not here to fight you. I promised my mother I would never fight again, and I have kept that promise for 3 years. Your wife is the first person I have ever had to physically stop since that promise was made, and I stopped her with the minimum force necessary. I did not hurt her. I will not hurt anyone in this room. But I will not leave until you look at me and know whose daughter I am." Silence. "Your money paid for the people who walked into my house and killed my father while he was making tea and killed my mother while she was folding laundry. And my mother used her last breath to make me promise that I would never be violent again. She used her dying words to try to save me from becoming the thing that killed her. So I am standing in your living room with my hands open. I am not armed. I am not dangerous. I am a woman keeping a promise to a dead woman who loved her." I held up my hands, palms out, open, the way my mother wanted them. "I want you to see these hands," I said. "These hands could hurt every person in this room. I know it. You are about to know it. Your wife already knows it. But these hands are open because a woman who sold tomatoes in Lagos asked me to keep them that way. And her request is worth more to me than anything your money could buy or your power could threaten." I let the silence hold. I let it fill the room. I let it press against every armed man and every expensive surface and the leather chair where Enzo DeLuca sat with an expression that was no longer confident or dismissive, but something more complicated. Something I had never seen on a man like him before. Uncertainty. "I am going to leave now," I said. "I am going to walk out your front door and down your hill and through your city. And you are going to decide what to do about me. You can send men. You can send orders. You can do what you did to my family and erase me the way you erased them. But you will do it knowing my name. You will do it knowing my mother's face. You will do it knowing that the woman you erased was keeping a promise made in blood and love, and that erasing her is not a business decision. It is a confession." I turned. I walked toward the door. 4 armed men stood between me and it. I walked toward them with my hands open, palms out, and I did not stop, and they looked at Enzo, and Enzo said nothing, and they parted. I walked out, down the hill, through the city, past the people and the shops and the fear. I walked home. I sat at my table. I put my hands flat on the surface, palms down. "I kept my promise, Mama," I said. I did not fight. I did not close my fists. I stood in his house, and I showed him my hands, and I walked out alive. What happened after that is something I am still living through. Enzo DeLuca did not send men. Not that night. Not the next night. Not in the 2 months since. I do not know why. I do not know if it was something I said or something he saw in my hands or something that happened inside him when a woman who had every right to be violent chose to be open instead. Marco called me once. He said things were changing inside the organization. He said my visit had done something that fists could not do. He said the word he heard Enzo use, sitting alone in his study the night I left, staring at his own hands, was a word that men like Enzo DeLuca do not say often and never say in front of others. The word was shame. I do not know if that is true. I do not know if shame is enough. I do not know if a man who authorized the death of my parents can be changed by a woman standing in his living room with open hands and a dead mother's voice in her ears. But I know this. I am still here. I am still alive. I am still keeping my promise. And my hands, these hands that could break a human body in 4 seconds, are carrying plates again. At a different restaurant. In the same city. Because I am not running anymore. And every night, I sit at my table, and I talk to my mother, and I tell her that her last wish was not wasted. That the promise she extracted from me with her dying breath was the most powerful weapon I have ever carried. More powerful than my fists. More powerful than my speed. More powerful than anything the underground Circuit or Enzo De Luca or Viktor Volkov ever built. Because violence is loud, and loudness fades. But an open hand in a room full of closed ones is a silence so deafening that even powerful men cannot sleep through it. Mama, I am still here, and my hands are still open. And that is my story. All of it. Every scar and every silence and every morning I woke up and chose the harder thing because a woman who sold tomatoes told me to. If this story hit you somewhere you were not expecting, if it stayed in your chest after the last word, then I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that button like it is the most important thing you do today, because it might be. Share this story with someone who is fighting something tonight, someone who needs to know that the strongest thing you can do is not always to swing. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is open your hands. Drop a comment. Tell me one thing. Just one thing. Tell me what your mother told you. What was her last piece of advice, her favorite saying, the sentence she repeated so often that it became part of your skeleton? Tell me. I want to carry it. I want to add it to the collection of truths that women like my mother leave behind for daughters like me to hold on to when the world tries to close our fists. The next story is already coming. It is already breathing. And I promise you, it is going to meet you exactly where you are. I will see you there.